Welcome back. I'm going to ask you something simple. If you had to name the most famous Chinese stars the world has ever known, would Bruce Lee be in your top 3? Because at his peak, Bruce Lee wasn't just a movie star. He was a global cultural event. His name traveled farther than his films. His influence went beyond martial arts. And for many people in the West, he wasn't only entertainment. He became proof that an Asian man could stand at the center of the frame, dominate the screen, and force an audience to look at him with respect. That level of impact is rare. What's even rarer is this. The research, the documentaries, the debates, the arguments about Bruce Lee, many of them were built outside of China. Entire libraries of material exist overseas, trying to explain what he represented, why he mattered, and what exactly happened to him. Because as huge as his rise was, the ending was even louder. Bruce Lee's story didn't stretch across decades. It ended after just a handful of films. He died at 32. And almost immediately, the public split into camps. Some accepted the official explanation, others didn't. Rumors started moving faster than facts. People talked about contradictions, about strange details, about timelines that didn't line up, about powerful forces inside the film world and the martial arts world that may have wanted him controlled, used, or removed. And that's the part that still won't die. How does a man known for discipline, physical mastery, and obsession with control collapse so suddenly? Why did the story around his final hours become so messy, so public, and so difficult to pin down? And if the official conclusion is truly the whole truth, why have so many people for so many years refused to let it rest? Today, we're going to walk through Bruce Lee's rise, the explosion of his fame, and the final day that turned him into something more dangerous than a celebrity, not just a legend, a question. Before the mystery, before the rumors, before the unanswered questions, there was the rise. When people talk about Bruce Lee, they often forget how sudden his explosion really was. This wasn't a slow climb built over decades. It was a cultural shockwave. In the early 1970s, Hong Kong cinema was struggling, searching for something that could wake audiences up. And then, almost without warning, Bruce Lee stepped into the frame. The big boss changed everything. Audiences didn't just watch him, they reacted to him. The speed, the aggression, the intensity that felt raw, unpolished, and real. Ticket lines wrapped around theaters. Box office records fell. Within months, Bruce Lee wasn't just a rising star. He was the center of an entire industry, rebooting itself around one man. A year later, Fist of Fury pushed it even further. This time it wasn't only about fighting. It was about identity, about humiliation, pride, and rage. When Bruce Lee smashed through symbols meant to belittle Chinese people, audiences didn't see fiction, they saw release. The message traveled far beyond Hong Kong, reaching overseas Chinese communities and Western viewers who had never seen an Asian man portrayed with that kind of dominance on screen. Then came The Way of the Dragon. Bruce Lee didn't just star in it. He wrote it, directed it, controlled it, filmed it in Europe. And when he stood across from Chuck Norris in the Roman Colosseum, it wasn't just a fight scene. It was a statement. He wasn't following anyone's rules anymore. Hollywood noticed, but it didn't fully understand him. For years he had been there, taking small roles, teaching stars, waiting on the margins. Now suddenly he was too big to ignore. Enter, the dragon would become his bridge to the world, turning him into a global phenomenon. By the time that film was ready for release, Bruce Lee had become more than an actor. He had reshaped how the world saw martial arts, how it saw Asian masculinity, how it understood physical expression on screen. And that is what makes what happened next so hard to accept. Because just as the world was opening its doors to him, his story stopped. July 20th, 1973 didn't begin like the end of a legend. That afternoon, Bruce Lee was focused, alert, and planning ahead. He had meetings lined up, scripts to discuss, projects still unfinished. One of them was Game of Death, a film he was shaping as both a creative statement and a challenge to the industry that had underestimated him for years. Earlier in the day, he met with Raymond Chow, the head of Golden Harvest. They talked business. They talked story. Nothing about that conversation suggested panic or decline. Bruce Lee was thinking forward, not backward. Later in the afternoon, Bruce Lee and Raymond Chow went to the apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei. The plan was simple: continue discussing the film, go over ideas, then meet for dinner. At some point during the visit, Bruce Lee complained of a headache. This wasn't unusual. He had experienced headaches before, especially during periods of intense work. Betty Ting Pei gave him a painkiller, the same type he had reportedly taken in the past. Bruce Lee lay down in a bedroom to rest. Raymond Chow left the apartment first, heading to the restaurant where they were supposed to meet later that evening. Hours passed. When Betty Ting Pei went to check on Bruce Lee, he was still lying there, asleep, or so it seemed. She tried waking him. He didn't respond. At first, there was confusion, then concern, then fear. Phone calls were made. Raymond Chow rushed back. A private doctor was contacted. Attempts were made to revive him. None of them worked. By the time an ambulance arrived, Bruce Lee was already unresponsive. He was taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. At 1:38 p.m., Bruce Lee was pronounced dead. He was 32 years old. Almost immediately, the story fractured. Public statements said he died peacefully. Medical reports listed times that didn't fully match witness accounts. Details shifted depending on who was speaking and when they were asked. Reporters began noticing inconsistencies. And the more questions journalists asked, the less clean the timeline appeared. How did a man in peak physical condition collapse within hours? Why were there gaps in the sequence of events? And why did the official story seem to change before the public had even finished processing the shock? By the next morning, the world knew Bruce Lee was gone. Within days, the world was no longer sure how. In the days after Bruce Lee's death, the world wanted clarity. What it received was an answer that sounded final on paper but fragile everywhere else. An official investigation was launched. Medical records were reviewed. Witnesses were questioned. After days of examination, the conclusion was announced. Bruce Lee had died from cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. The death was ruled a misadventure linked to a severe reaction to a painkiller he had taken earlier that day. Case closed. But almost immediately, cracks appeared. People who followed the case closely noticed that the timeline didn't fully align. The times recorded in hospital documents didn't perfectly match the accounts given by those present earlier that evening. Some details were vague. Others shifted subtly depending on who was telling the story. And for a man whose body had been celebrated as a symbol of discipline and control, the explanation felt too simple. Public skepticism grew louder when toxicology reports revealed traces of substances that raised eyebrows, even if officials insisted they were not the direct cause of death. For many, that distinction felt technical, not convincing. The idea that a world-class athlete, known for obsessively managing his body, could die suddenly from a reaction to medication he had used before, didn't sit well. As the funeral approached, the emotional shock turned into something heavier. Nearly 30,000 people flooded the streets of Hong Kong to say goodbye. Crowds climbed signs and rooftops just to catch a glimpse of the coffin. This wasn't how the world treated an ordinary celebrity, and ordinary explanations didn't satisfy them. Rumors multiplied. Some whispered about exhaustion pushed too far. Others talked about long-term damage from extreme training methods. A few went further, pointing fingers at powerful interests within the film industry and martial arts world, suggesting Bruce Lee had become too influential, too uncontrollable. Years later, new theories would continue to surface, some scientific, some speculative. Each one trying to answer the same question the official verdict never truly silenced. How does someone who built his life around mastering the human body lose control of it so completely, so suddenly? The investigation ended. The doubt did not. After the verdict, the questions didn't slow down. They changed shape. People stopped asking only how Bruce Lee died. They started asking who he really was beneath the image. Some wondered if his body had been pushed beyond what biology allows. In the years before his death, Bruce Lee experimented constantly. Extreme training schedules, unconventional strength methods, strict diets, supplements, techniques designed to extract maximum performance in minimum time. To him, the body wasn't sacred. It was a system to be tested, refined, and overridden. Friends later described a man obsessed with efficiency. If something promised faster results, he wanted to try it. If a method claimed to compress years of training into months, it caught his attention. At the time, few questioned this mindset. After his death, many revisited it with unease. Others focused on a different debate. Was Bruce Lee truly as formidable in real combat as he appeared on screen? Supporters pointed to demonstrations that stunned seasoned fighters, the one-inch punch, speed tests captured on film, stories from witnesses who claimed his strikes were too fast to react to. Critics pushed back, arguing that cinema amplified his abilities and that some techniques, while spectacular, were impractical in uncontrolled fights. Even fellow martial artists offered mixed reactions. Some praised his genius. Others suggested that his influence had grown so large that few dared challenge the myth directly. The louder the crowd cheered, the harder it became to separate reality from legend. And then there was the philosophy. Be water. Those two words outlived everything else. More than the films, more than the controversies, more than the arguments about how he died. The idea of adaptability, fluidity, and refusal to be trapped by form resonated far beyond martial arts. It became a way of thinking repeated by people who had never thrown a punch in their lives. Yet there's an irony many overlook. A man who preached flexibility lived a life of relentless pressure. A man who warned against rigidity drove himself to the edge of human limits. And a man who rejected being frozen into a style became one of the most fixed images in popular culture. So the question remains, did Bruce Lee die because of a single tragic mistake? Or because he spent his entire life racing toward a level of control no human body could sustain? That answer may never be settled, but the debate he left behind is still very much alive. More than 50 years later, the arguments still haven't settled. New explanations appear, old theories resurface. Scientific papers, personal testimonies, and media reconstructions continue to circle the same moment in time. Each one claims to get closer. None of them fully close the gap. That's because Bruce Lee exists in a space where facts and belief collide. To some, he was a man who pushed his body too far too fast, using methods that modern science would later question. To others, he was a victim of misunderstanding, rushed conclusions, and a system eager to move on once the headlines faded. And for many, he remains something in between, a symbol so powerful that no explanation feels large enough to contain him. What makes his story endure isn't just how he lived or how he died. It's the discomfort of not knowing where the truth ends and the legend begins. So when people ask whether Bruce Lee's death was truly accidental or whether it revealed the hidden cost of genius obsession and relentless self-experimentation, they're really asking something else. How much can a human being push against their limits before the limits push back? And if Bruce Lee couldn't escape that answer, what makes the rest of us think we can?